So, welcome everyone. I think everyone knows who I am, but I'm Mark Movsesi, and I'm the director of the Mattone Center for Law and Religion. I'd like to welcome you all. I want to have a special welcome, or give a special welcome to Denise and Michael Mattone, whose extraordinarily generous gift we are acknowledging tonight. Also to the center's board members who are here. I don't want to miss anybody. Rich Hands, Judge Viscosal, Judge Sullivan, who's up on the podium, Tom Principe. So thank you very much for coming. And also Dean Jefferson Exum, thank you so much for joining us too. So this is the first Directors Summit. I'm going to say a little bit more about what I mean by first in a minute. But this is also the inaugural event for the Mattone Center to celebrate the renaming. I should say we've already done several events since the renaming, so we might think of this as the formal inauguration. It's always good to celebrate. But we have done things before, and as we tried to think of what to do, there were three goals we had in mind: something new, something of substance, and something that points to the future. So as to something new, this is the first time this has ever been done. The first time we have gathered together the directors of law and religion centers and clinics across the country. It literally has never been done before. And it's been a wonderful opportunity. So that's for something new. As far as something of substance, we have spent the day, the participants in the summit, discussing our mission, our scholarship, our curricula, and our programs. I think we had, as they say, a frank and robust exchange of views. And you'll be hearing about that today from two different panels. We tried to split it up, which is why I'm trying to corral everybody to make sure we stay on time. The first panel is going to be a discussion of mission and scholarship, and that's going to be right behind me. There's Whitney Barth from Emory, Steve Collis from the University of Texas, Mark DiGirolamo from Catholic, Brett Scharfs from BYU, and Ruth Okediji from Harvard. Actually, I think, Rich, you were going to introduce them. I cut into that. And then we'll break after 40 minutes, have a second panel with our other panelists who will be introduced then, I guess I'd say. Okay, so that's something of substance. As for something new, it's my hope that although this is the first Center Director Summit, it's not going to be the last. It's been a wonderful opportunity to really talk about how we can provide for the education, contribute to the education of students, and also contribute to the wider public debate in law and religion. So my hope is that we'll make this a rotating summit. It can be somebody else next time, but maybe in a year or two, we'll do this again. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Judge Sullivan, who will introduce the first panel on mission and scholarship.
Great. Thank you, Mark, and congratulations to Mark and to Michael and Denise. This has really been a remarkable growth of this center. I mean, I was there in the early years, and I think it's always been a fabulous center, but I think the momentum and the energy now is really, really palpable. So this was a wonderful event that we had today. So I got to sit in like a law clerk taking notes as the center directors and clinic directors were talking about the mission, goals, and operation of their centers and their clinics. And so it was really fascinating. I really want to give another shout out to this center. I mean, I think this center has been at the forefront in a lot of ways, and certainly in the New York area. And if you don't know it already, I mean, the podcast Legal Spirits, that is a regular feature of this center, is just terrific. I have to say, I tune in all the time. I learn a ton. It's so soothing. The music is great. The voices are great. It's just a lovely, lovely presentation in a world where so much noise is otherwise spent and thrown at you. But there's also been new developments. And Mark is going to talk about this a little bit later, but there's a YouTube feature now for this center with videos that are getting tremendous exposure. And so the center is also exploring new things to try to reach more people and to, I think, provoke thought and discussion. And that really is the purpose of it. So a Directors Summit is really something because there are other centers like it, though distinct and different in some ways. Some also have clinics associated with them, which is something St. John's does not have with the center. But that's very much a part of the mission of the schools that do and of the centers. So I thought I would just briefly introduce the panelists. I could go on all night if I really got into detail, but I'll start with Mark DiGirolamo, who really needs no introduction. Around here, he's known as the prodigal son. So it's good to have him back. Mark is now the inaugural St. John Henry Newman Professor of Law and the co-director for the Center for Law and the Human Person. He's published everywhere. We did a program at Catholic just last week, so he's always provocative. I will say Mark has been ahead of the curve on history and tradition for a decade. I think that it's interesting. He called it and is now very influential, I think, in explaining the contours and the future of history and tradition with respect to things like the Second Amendment, First Amendment, and other constitutional provisions. Mark was obviously at St. John's for many years as the Carey Fields Professor of Law. He's been a visiting professor at some of the schools that are represented here today. And he's just a good friend and a great leader. Starting to my far right is Whitney Barth. Whitney is the executive director and the Charlotte McDaniel Scholar at the Center for the Study of Law and Religion at Emory Law School. Emory was really the first, I think, of these centers. And you can see Emory's imprint on others that developed along the way, including St. John's. Each is distinct. But Emory, I think, generally gets credit for being the pioneer in this space. So Whitney, prior to joining Emory and heading up the center, was a litigator in private practice. She's a graduate of Chicago Law School, but she also is a graduate. She has a master's in divinity at the Harvard Divinity School, and she graduated from Miami University. She's authored a number of pieces, and really I had a fascinating time listening to you today. So I'm delighted to chat more. Next to Whitney's left and to my a little farther to the right, or a little less far to the right, is Stephen Collis. Stephen is a professor at Texas Law School. He is also the founding faculty director of the Beck-Lachlan First Amendment Center and of its Law and Religion Clinic. So Texas has a clinic. Prior to joining Texas, Stephen was a research fellow in the Constitutional Law Center at Stanford Law School. And it's just, I think, what Emory was to centers, I think Stanford has sort of been to the clinics in a lot of ways, sort of leading the way in this space. We'll talk more about that probably on the next panel a little more. Stephen was also a partner in private practice at Holland & Hart. He's written extensively in this space, but he's also written fiction and he's written historical novels. He's got one out now and another coming soon. Is that right?
One that just released.
Got it. So in any event, he is a Renaissance man, to say the least. He's a graduate of Michigan Law School. He has a Master's of Fine Arts from Virginia Commonwealth and his undergraduate was at Brigham Young University. So to my far left is Ruth Okediji. She is the Jeremiah Smith Jr. Professor of Law at Harvard Law School. She's co-director of the Berkman Klein Center. She is a internationally renowned expert on intellectual property law as well as development law. If I went on and on, if I did a full bio for Ruth, we'd be here like into the evening. But she is also, I think, as pertinent here, she founded and serves as the faculty director of the Harvard Law School program on biblical law and Christian legal studies. And her experience there with those subjects and with the student body at Harvard is really fascinating. She's a graduate of the University of Jos in Nigeria and Harvard Law School. And finally, to my immediate left is Brett Scharfs. Brett is the Rex Lee Chair and Professor of Law at Brigham Young University's J. Reuben Clark Law School. He is a director. He's also the director of the International Center for Law and Religion Studies. He, over the past year, has been a visiting professor at universities in Budapest, Beijing, Vietnam, Myanmar, Australia, and Japan. Imagine the frequent flyer miles he has. He's written more than 100 articles and book chapters. He's made 300 presentations. This is, I guess, 301 maybe. He's a graduate of Georgetown University, where he got a BA and a master's in philosophy. He was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford. Got another degree in philosophy. He received his JD from Yale Law School. So, wow, what a panel we have. I think one of the things we talked about this morning was the difference and relevance of a school having a center where the school is a secular institution or a public institution, as in the case with Stephen, or it's a religious school. Mark, I thought I'd maybe throw this to you. You've been now at two schools, both religious schools that have centers for law and religion. And so how do you think that makes a difference, or does it make a difference?
Well, I think this is on, right?
Yeah.
So thanks very, very much, Judge, for those generous remarks and introduction. It's so
I called you the prodigal son. I don't know if that's real. So around here, that's not real.
At least I'm biblical. That's good. My own thoughts about this are, of course, related to the my experience at being at St. John's for a long time and now at Catholic University. Both of these are as you note, Catholic, not just private, but Catholic institutions. And some of the things that I had to say today involved comparing the Center for Law and Religion, which I co-directed with Mark for a long time, and the center that I'm now involved in, which I co-direct with my colleague Elizabeth Kirk, called the Center for Law and the Human Person. Both of these are, there are some similarities and there's some differences. And the differences involve, of course, that one of the differences is that the Center for Law and Religion is about the study of law and religion in its sort of breadth and across a number of different kinds of religious traditions. The Center for Law and the Human Person is a more, I would say, distinctively Catholic project. It is focused on the Catholic intellectual tradition, and it aims to bring the breadth and wealth of that tradition to our students, to expose our students to that tradition across a number of dimensions: historical, metaphysical, philosophical. And I talked a little bit about that this morning, but I think that there are actually a lot of similarities between our centers too, and I tried to marshal a certain amount of evidence to show that what Mark has been involved in, even though Mark is not himself Catholic, has really been instrumental in advancing the Catholic mission of St. John's. If you look at the kinds of people that he has invited, the breadth of intellectual perspective that he has given voice to Catholic scholars, people who will bring an authentically Catholic perspective on legal issues. The conferences that he has championed and the programs that he has been involved in involving Christians in the Middle East. That, I think, represents a strong voice for the Catholic mission of St. John's, the Vincentian mission. The reading group that he leads for students, reading works like C.S. Lewis's Learning in Wartime, or portions of St. Augustine's City of God, or A Canticle for Leibowitz by Walter Miller, or Alistair MacIntyre's After Virtue, and on, works of Shakespeare, A Measure for Measure, The Merchant of Venice, involving themes of mercy and justice. He may not be Catholic, but he sees and puts at the heart of his work the Catholic mission, and he feels that there is an important voice and a place for Catholicism in the law, Christianity in the law, and makes that, I think, has been as strong a representative of the Catholic intellectual tradition at St. John's as anybody that I can remember in my time at St. John's. And so I think that is an extremely important contribution and something that unifies. It's a lesson that I've taken from Mark, and I've tried to amplify that in the work that I'm doing now. But my view is that at a Catholic school, a law and religion center should do Catholic things. It should have that as core part of its mission. I learned that from Mark taught by him in his way and with his sensibilities, and I've tried to carry that on where I'm working now.
So that's interesting, because Mark, I think sometimes would say that he strives for a more neutral approach. And so, Stephen, maybe I'll turn to you, because you're the only one here at a public institution, a state institution, the University of Texas. I imagine you would have difficulty taking the position that Mark just articulated at a school that would have First Amendment challenges if you did that. Or is that not right?
No, I think that's right. And I'm at the University of Texas. It's a public institution. I think between the undergraduate and graduate school campuses, faculty and staff, we have something like 53,000 people on campus every day. It's a major institution with a lot of constituencies represented. I was joking around with Mark earlier today that if, since I'm the director of the First Amendment Center in the Law and Religion Clinic, if we're going to teach these things through one religious perspective, it's going to be mine. And that might make a whole lot of other religious people and non-religious people upset. So what we try to do is I direct the Beck Laughlin First Amendment Center, which focuses on all the freedoms of the First Amendment, not just religion. But our mission is to foster an appreciation for those freedoms within our legal system and come to explore and understand those freedoms from really every viewpoint imaginable in the academy. And so we do that through the Law and Religion Clinic, where students get to work on religious liberty cases. We do that through scholarship, through education, through bringing in scholarly fellows and supporting their scholarship. Lots of programming, both for the community, but also internally for students and faculty. And, we sponsor students going on internships. We really do not discriminate based on any type of religious viewpoint or any other viewpoint, quite frankly. Our goal is to simply have a robust discussion of these things and explore them in a way that fits for a community the size of the University of Texas. And I think that works well for us, but I think what you're going to find is that, I think Mark's mission is perfectly appropriate for a Catholic institution. I think it makes perfect sense. I think the way we've defined our mission, or the way I've defined our mission at the University of Texas, makes sense for a large public institution with different constituencies and a multitude of viewpoints that could be represented on campus. I see the center as the forum through which all sorts of viewpoints can come and be expressed, but the forum itself does not express opinions on things. The idea is that the forum is there, which it was not for the last century, and so I'm grateful that it's there now and can be a place to really discuss these ideas in a robust way.
Yeah. Whitney, so you're at a university that did begin with a religious identity, a Methodist institution. Like a lot of institutions, that is no longer, I guess, as pronounced. In terms of the mission of your center, which is the oldest of the bunch, do you view yourself sort of closer to Stephen or closer to Mark or somewhere in between?
Yeah, but thank you. And thank you again for hosting this wonderful event. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. I would say we're closer to the vision that Stephen has articulated. The center doesn't take positions on particular religious traditions. We have expertise through our scholars and through our scholarship in particular areas: law and Christianity, law and Judaism, law and Islam. And then we also engage with law and in a number of different other traditions through like the Journal of Law and Religion and through our Canopy Forum platform. But we as a center don't have a particular religious mission that undergirds our work. I think like all of the centers that are here, we certainly take religion seriously in the conversation and think that these intersections of law and religion are particularly generative in a number of different ways and across a number of different disciplines as well. But in terms of the kind of the position of the center itself, we are we don't have a particular religious mission in that respect. And I will also say that we don't have a clinic either, but we do have opportunities for research and scholarship. We have a number of different law and religion courses and training opportunities, and then we also have public programs. And those three threads are interwoven in different ways in the life of our center. And so we're looking at a number of different constituencies as well.
So, Brett, we had been talking this morning, and one of the things that was discussed was how each of the centers in some ways takes on the personality of the directors that they have had. And some have had more directors, and others have had only one to this point. And you had suggested that your focus had changed a little bit, or evolved, perhaps, is the better way to say it. You're at an institution that is obviously a religiously affiliated institution. And so in terms of your mission or the perceived mission that you have for the center and the students have, do you find yourself closer to Mark or somewhere more like what Whitney was describing?
Well, the sponsoring institution of BYU is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and there's a deep commitment to religious freedom in the history, the culture, and even the doctrine of the church. And so having a center there devoted to law and religion studies is quite a natural thing. When I was talking to the Mattones earlier, my mind's eye went back to a bus ride I had in India with a man named King Hussein, who was a potential donor. And he said, "Brett, tell me what your center does. I'm thinking of making a contribution." And this was a great opportunity. So we were on the bus to the Taj Mahal, and I gave my best summary, and it took, I think, 5 to 7 minutes. And he said, "That was interesting, but I'm a businessman, and that was a little too complicated for me. Can you tell me in 1 minute, what is it you do?" Now, 1 minute is not easy for an academic, but I recommitted myself to the principle of brevity, and I put on my thinking cap, and I did my very best. And I got it down, I think, to probably 90 seconds. And he said, "That was better. You almost have me." He said, "I'm going to give you one more chance. Can you tell me in 5 words, what is it you do?" And I said, "Religious freedom for everyone." 4 words. And he said, "You got me." And you can imagine our next annual report, right? 30-point font across the cover, religious freedom for all. And that's what it is. It's standing for a principle, not advocating for one group or one religion, and not even advocating so much as using the intersection of law and religion to work for laws that will facilitate better interactions between the state and people, and the state and religious institutions. And one of the things that's distinctive about our center is the international focus. And it really started with our director, who was Cole Durham, and he was coming of age as a professor right as the Iron Curtain was falling. And he was working in the countries of the former Soviet Empire. And as he worked in those countries, as they were newly emerging democracies, they needed help with their constitutions and with their laws for registration of religious groups. And that was the milieu from which our center developed and grew.
So, Ruth, Harvard is different. I mean, I think in a lot of ways. No, I mean, I don't mean that in a bad or good way. I just think Harvard is different. Your experience and what you were describing as courses you teach, things you do, what you described as outside of the classroom, struck me as very interesting and in some ways unique. Could you maybe just describe for folks what you told us earlier today?
So thank you again. Can everyone hear me? So we are not a center in the way that you've heard from some of my friends and colleagues on the panel tonight. Ours is a program on biblical law and Christian legal studies. We are very mission-oriented. It is about spiritual formation, and it's a commitment to the conviction that lawyers, students, professionals, leaders, because Harvard produces a disproportionate amount of leaders nationally and globally, but that leaders lead best when they are whole, when they are thinking both about the values that they stand for and the kind of impact that they want to make in the world. And every CEO, every president, every leader of any business or institution has a spiritual life. And the real question is why we educate our students as though they only have a mind and no heart and no soul, that they don't think about life in its fullness. And so our program is oriented towards the whole person, and in particular to raise up leaders who have had the opportunity and the space to both interrogate their own faith, to be strengthened in it, and to be clear about its claims and how those claims relate to the laws and the policies and the choices that we make as people, as institutions, and as a society. Very explicit about what we do. And I think as most law professors in this room recognize, and I think anyone who's led an organization, most of the learning that molds our students, that molds a new generation, happens not in the formal spaces. I teach contracts, and so my students are, I hope, excellent transactional lawyers. I met Fontini, I think, who's a commercial real estate lawyer who's a graduate from St. John's, and she reads lots of contracts every day, and that is absolutely important, the excellence of the skills that we teach our students. But every interaction and every transaction has a set of values that it either incorporates or reflects, and the lawyers that facilitate those transactions come to it with a spirit, with a heart, with a sense of this is fair, this is not fair, this is good behavior, bad behavior. And the question is, how do we make sure that there's clarity in understanding and in leading with that kind of purpose? Every leader does that. So we excavate, in the mentoring process, in out of class sessions. I was sharing with the group this morning that each year I teach a class that is very explicitly grounded in scripture, in biblical scripture. So this year I taught a class on mercy. Last year I taught a class on prayer. The year before that I taught a course on women in the Bible. There's all this controversy about what does Christianity really say about women. And so I said, well, let's just study it. The year before that, I taught a class on forgiveness. Now, it was actually very interesting to me that in a profession like the law, where we pray to the court or we ask for a relief or we talk about judgment, we rarely hear the word forgiveness. And it is so much a part of the background music of our legal system. And for my students, sort of recognizing that when we make certain decisions, we are saying to someone that, whether it's in private law or in public law, we're saying to someone, we will not exact from you the full cost of your decision. And there's something that we have already decided is important in a redemptive fashion. And that class was particularly illustrative for many of my students who will be leaders and who will be judges and who will be doing much of the work of leadership. And so we do that outside the classroom. We have something called the Law and Faith Lecture, which is an annual university-wide lecture, because modeling for students what it looks like to be excellent in your craft and excellent in your faith is one of the most powerful ways that we impact the next generation. So we bring in scholars from all over the world who are at the top of their field, and they speak on a topic that they care about. Sometimes it's explicitly biblical. Sometimes it's, this is what my faith has done in my professional life. So it's a physician, someone who's leading an international relief organization, a philosopher like Robbie George, lots of speakers coming through because we think it's important to model for students the caricature of religion or faith as belonging to people who shy away from intellectual rigor gets knocked over, but also they are seeing the capacity of faith to transform the convictions by which they work and the excellence by which they work. And I always say to my students, if God is pleased with it, I'm okay with that.
Well, Mark has written about the rise of the nuns, people who are not affiliated with a particular religion, who don't identify as such. And so I'm curious, I would think among law students, I would think there might be some hostility or indifference to centers like this and the types of courses that are taught at centers like this. But what Ruth has described is quite different. It sounds like there's quite an appetite for it. Whitney, I was hoping maybe you could speak to this. Who are the students and what are they looking for in the courses and the scholarship coming out of your center?
Great. I love that question because I think working with the students is one of my favorite parts of my job. We have students coming from a range of perspectives, both religious and non-religious, in terms of the political spectrum, in terms of how they understand or think about or kind of feel about religion and its role in public life. And I think one of the best things that we can offer our students is a space to kind of interrogate their presuppositions about what they think they know about law and religion and those intersections, and to give them new tools for thinking about both the field but also public life in broader ways. And I think to get the space to have conversations with each other across these different differences. And I think we find there's not particularly one profile of a student who is kind of the model law and religion student. That we certainly have students who do identify as being religious, but certainly there are others who do not. And we have some who want to go on and work somewhere in the field of law and religion, either as litigators or as academics. But we also have plenty of students who don't see that as part of their path, but see there is importance in understanding the kind of nuances of this intersection and see that and see that as a value add for their legal education. And whether it's the kinds of clients they may meet in their practice or the kinds of colleagues they may encounter, but law and religion really allows you to be able to dig deep and try to understand how different communities, for instance, understand legal problems or understand legal issues within their own tradition or within the public sphere. And so I think that's appealing for students to be able to say, I don't know everything about this. I want to know more. And I think that helps to build a kind of deeper understanding and to help them start asking the right questions. My hope is that they'll go away with more questions. Certainly with the foundation of both content understanding and kind of deeper understanding of different people's perspectives, but also a kind of curiosity about the world and about each other.
So, Stephen, your center is a First Amendment center with a law and religion clinic. First Amendment is very easy for students to understand. I think. It's complicated, but they understand what they're in for. They understand what they're walking into. Law and religion, it seems much more amorphous. It seems like it would cover a much broader range of things. And so is there a reason for the distinction between the name of the clinic and the name of the center? And what does it mean in terms of the scholarship and the courses available from the center?
Yeah, the First Amendment covers the freedoms of religion, speech, press, assembly, the right to petition the government. So you've got a lot of different freedoms involved, and each of them is equally complex in my view. And so freedom of religion is one of those. But we have a lot of programming and other things we offer that focus on exploring the freedom of speech, press, assembly, petition, all these things. And each one is complex enough that each could probably have its own clinic. And in fact, at some universities, there are other clinics that call themselves First Amendment clinics, but really all they do is focus on speech, whereas our clinic focuses on religious liberty. I will say, going back to your other question, though, about students and their reactions to this, just to lighten things up a little bit, I have found that in life, you tend to get in a lot of trouble when you think you understand something, but you don't, and then you act on it. The story I like to tell about this is when I was 9 years old, I was going to a Catholic summer camp. I grew up in a family that was like quasi-Catholic, quasi-atheist. It's a weird mix. And when I was going to this summer camp, and I was 9 years old, and it was in New Mexico, and back then, little boys like me, I thought it was really cool to spike up our hair. So my family didn't have a lot of money. We all shared one bathroom. I went into the bathroom. I got the mousse, put it in my hair, spiked up my hair. I was pretty proud of myself, came strutting out. And right then, my mom walked by, and she started sniffing. She said, "What is that smell?" And I very proudly said, "It's the mousse." And her eyes got really big. And she grabbed me, spun me around, ran me back into the bathroom, slammed my head into the sink, started washing my hair out. And it turns out that what I thought was mousse was actually her hair removal product, Nair. And all my hair started falling out. So I tell that story to all of our new students, all the one else, because they all come in thinking that they know what the First Amendment is, and they think they know what religious liberty is. Most of them have absolutely no idea. And they make decisions and choices based on that. And one of the goals of our center and of our clinic is to help them understand, first of all, that they don't understand these things, that they need to open their minds a little bit. And hopefully by the time they leave, have a much richer and deeper understanding of all of these freedoms, in particular religious liberty law, and how law and religion interact, and all of the complex issues around that, and how that relates to us as human beings, and how complicated these issues really are. Most of them have just absolutely no idea when they start. So to the extent there ever is hostility, it usually almost always comes from, at least among the students, an assumption that they understand it when they actually really don't.
So, Mark, I mean, you and I have talked about this before, about what does law and religion mean? Do you need to define religion before you can sort of define the scholarship associated with it? And so I wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
I think this is a good question. And just sort of listening to Steve, I think in a similar way, a lot of our students who are there, they are at Catholic, but they don't know what the Catholic intellectual tradition is all about. They have no background in it. They know perhaps that they're in some ways attracted by it, or maybe they've read a little bit of a smattering of Aquinas here or there, or a fragment of Augustine or something like this. But I think something that we can offer is to give religion a little bit more specificity than it has, for example, now in the law, where it is increasingly unclear and increasingly sort of, unclear. It's religion has a kind of liquid definition. It can be sort of everything and anything in which someone feels strongly, and courts are, for some good reasons, unwilling to get into too much definitional work. I think that there's some problems with having no definitions at all, but we're not courts at the Catholic University, and we do have a religious tradition that we're proud of and that we think has a lot to offer students, that students can learn about, get involved in, agree or disagree. There's a lot to learn. And I think for our students, increasingly, there's a hunger to learn about that tradition. And it's a tradition that has enough heft and depth in it to cover a lot of different courses and a lot of different outlooks and a lot of differences in perspectives, but it's there waiting for the eager student to come and dive into and invest in. And I think that's the distinctive contribution that we can make is on this front, giving something concrete and real in its richness and complexity in a specific religious tradition rather than religion writ large.
So, Ruth, I wanted to ask you. I mean, you are an expert in a particular discipline, but you're also doing these religion courses and outside of the classroom, as you described. What for a student who wants to pursue an academic career in the space of law and religion, where would you direct them? What areas of law? What research projects? What kind of scholarship would be fruitful for an aspiring academic?
So that's a really great question, and one that probably attracts the most attention in terms of where we invest both our time and resources. There are two things that I think are challenging for all of our centers, at least those that want to both illuminate the core faith claims of our Christian tradition and Christian convictions, but also impact and affect human flourishing. And the first is biblical literacy is at an all-time low in the U.S. So when I taught the course, Famous Stories in the Bible, as I was sharing with the colleagues this morning, it was highly in demand. But just going through even the story of David and Goliath, just seeing how little we have a generation that knows very little about these things, and so we have a theologian in residence. And so the first thing, somebody says, well, I really want to write about what forgiveness means in the criminal justice system. I said, well, how about you study first what is forgiveness? And that means understanding this from the Torah. It means understanding the redemptive purpose of the gospel. And so they go spend a couple of hours with a theologian in residence. They get reading materials, conversations, and we brought in, this is a permanent position within our program, precisely for students, whether you have faith or no faith, because the level of biblical knowledge is so low. So that's an office that we have, that we are deeply committed to, and folks come from all over the university to meet with him, to talk, to ask questions. Some of them do it anonymously. We just facilitate all of that because we do want to see biblical literacy improve in this generation. So that is a foundation. And then we move to another stream of kind of block building where we ensure that they are reading from different perspectives. Because just because you're a person of faith doesn't mean you agree with everything another person of faith has said. And we want the rigor and the open-mindedness to say, well, what is this debate about? And how do I become a voice, be a part of it, and not just sort of a voice in the wilderness? And so we spend a lot of time building research skills. We often form them in groups. So my Christian legal perspectives course this semester, they read each other's drafts. They point to works that they've read that a colleague may not have read, and we have a lot of iron sharpening iron. It's the depth of the work is really important. And this was brought to really important to me because a student of mine was talking about a class he was sitting in where there was a lot of discussion about how anti-women and anti-race and anti-all these things the Bible was. And he finally said, I don't know what Bible you're talking about. He pulled out his Bible from his backpack. And there are kids who still do this, right? I mean, and just read from Isaiah 61, right there in class. And we want our students to have that kind of boldness to dispel both myths, but to clarify. There's still a lot of reference in our profession to biblical imagery, biblical lessons, biblical stories, and we want to make sure that that's really grounded. And so we start with a theological kind of basis. We build with research and the sharpening of ideas and robust engagement with ideas that maybe even are in tension or opposition to the thesis you want to advance. And then we work on the writing. I'm very big that in a secular culture, people who want to do work in the space of law and Christianity must be top-notch. This cannot be sloppy. It cannot be shipshod. It's got to be top-notch. And so we connect them with scholars in the field who will comment on their papers, and we go through that process. So in terms of what they want, I tell them, what are you passionate about? And what does the scripture have to say about it? And what have theologians said about it? And what research has already been done? And then they find the argument, they find their voices, scholars in the making, and we nurture them through that process.
So, Brett, I mean, you have a true... Oh, really?
It's a great conversation, but we got to keep on schedule.
One question for Brett. Just briefly, Brett, can you talk about the international... Well, just the international stuff you're doing. I know that you are cultivating scholars internationally to write in U.S. law schools and law journals and elsewhere.
So I'm going to be very brief. I've only had a few epiphanies in my life, but one relates directly to what Ruth was just saying. I was asked to give a presentation on what ordinary people can do to promote religious freedom. And I was standing in the shower and I suddenly had an insight, and it was, live your faith. Live it more openly, live the best version of it, live it joyfully, live it publicly. And if we're willing to do that, the value of religious freedom won't be contested, because the value of religious freedom isn't religious freedom. It's the beauty of the lives that people of faith live. And so for those of us who care about law and religion, for those who care about religious freedom, it's incumbent upon us to live our faiths in ways that people won't question whether religious freedom is a value worth valuing.
All right. Well, we can talk more over dinner perhaps, but we're going to switch now. All right. Well, thank you very much, and please thank the panel.
I'm sorry, it's a great event. We'll have plenty of time to talk at dinner. I was saying before, the wedding planner, I've just got to keep it moving, right? So let's keep it moving. Okay, Judge.
Well, now you see why DiGirolamo left. The guy's a micromanager. So I'll do brief introductions, but I don't think we can not have introductions just because you need to know who's on the panel, and they're so impressive. We'll begin with Jennifer Coe to Mark's right. Jennifer teaches immigration law, criminal law, and evidence at Pepperdine Law School, the Crusoe Law School there. She also serves as the co-director of the Notre Institute on Law, Religion, and Ethics at that law school. She's written extensively on the intersection of immigration and Christianity. She received her J.D. from Columbia, so she's a local kid. Clerked on the Eastern District of New York with Judge Nickerson, who I knew pretty well. And before entering into the academy, was a lawyer in private practice at WilmerHale and did a bunch of other interesting things. To her right is, I'm just going to get to John Miser. John is the Associate Clinical Professor of Law and the Director of Notre Dame Law School's Lindsay and Matt Maroon Religious Liberty Clinic. Am I pronouncing it Maroon? Yeah. John teaches and researches subjects involving religious liberty, litigation practice in federal courts. He runs their clinic. He's a double domer, I guess, right? He got his undergraduate degree from Notre Dame, as well as his law degree from there, where he's editor-in-chief of the Law Review. Prior to coming back to the academy, he served as a law clerk to Dermot Scanlon. He was in private practice at Sidley Austin in D.C. He was in the Office of the Inspector General at the Department of Commerce. And so I want to hear more about the center and what the clinic and what you guys are doing there. So thank you, John, and welcome. To my immediate left is Jim Sani. Jim heads up Stanford Law School's Religious Liberty Clinic, which is kind of the granddaddy of them all. Is that fair? It certainly seemed to be. So that's the leading line. Yeah. Well, others have come through there and worked with Jim. And so Jim is a graduate of Duke University, has a J.D. from Harvard Law School. He clerked for Judge Edith Brown Clement on the Fifth Circuit. He was a professor at Ave Maria Law School when it was in Michigan, so before it went to Florida. That was a bad bet, but that's what drove you out to California. He was in private practice in L.A. And Virginia, and he has been a visiting professor at Harvard and other places. So, Jim, thank you and welcome. And to Jim's immediate left, I'll start with Mike because that's where my screen is. Mike Moreland, you may know Mike has been at events sponsored by the center before. Mike is a professor at Villanova Law School. He's also the director of the Eleanor McCullen Center for Law, Religion, and Public Policy. He's been doing that since 2017. He was a vice dean at the law school at Villanova for a number of years prior to 2015. Teaches also evidence, torts, and bioethics and the law. He is a Notre Dame guy as well, BC, and a JD from Michigan Law School, clerked for Paul Kelly on the 10th Circuit, and was an associate at Williams & Connolly. He also worked in the White House as the associate director for domestic policy under George W. Bush. And last but not least, let me just pull you up. We're not sitting in the order that I had these, I'm sorry. So Josh McDaniel is not the guy who coaches in the NFL. That's Josh McDaniels. But I think he's more successful than the guy who did. So Josh is the assistant clinical professor of law at Harvard Law School, where he's the director of the school's Religious Freedom Clinic. He supervises students in a range of things that we're going to hear about. These are really fascinating clinics that are doing this kind of work. Previously, he was also in private practice. He was at Munger Tolles and at Horvitz Levy, where he focused on religious liberty issues. He's argued in a number of courts all over the country. He clerked for Cormac Carney in the Central District of California and Jay Bybee on the Ninth Circuit. He is a graduate, undergrad at Brigham Young, and then first in his class at UCLA Law School. So very impressive. Oh, Mark Movsesian, you know Mark. I don't have to introduce. I could, but I won't. All right. So, I mean, Mark, I want to start with you just because we talked about a little bit some of the things that you're doing to make sure that law and religion and law and religion topics are accessible to people. And one of the things you've got is your podcast, and another is the YouTube program. So could you just tell us briefly about that?
Yeah, sure. So we talked about this in our meetings about what we should do as directors of center. One very important thing is scholarship. All of us have done scholarship. I mean, traditional long-form law review scholarship. But I think another role that we have is trying to educate the bar and also the public more broadly. And so at the center, what we try to do is expand our reach, not simply to the academic world, but also to the broader world. And the way we do that is through a blog, which is called Law and Religion Forum, which has posts produced. By the way, we have our 4 fellows here in the back. They'll be at dinner with you. They can introduce themselves later, our 4 student fellows. They do around the web posts once a week, which is a compendium of law and religion cases and issues that are in the news. We have a weekly scholarship roundup, which is a compendium of new monographs, basically in law and religion. We have a podcast series, up to 65 episodes now, called Legal Spirits. The latest one is on reading C.S. Lewis in law school, which I think came out very well. And just this month, we've started a YouTube channel with an animated video series. This is a new thing for me, animated videos. The video series is called Landmark Cases in Religious Freedom. And the first one is about People versus Phillips, which is a very early case from New York about the priest penitent privilege. It has, I just checked now outside, it has, as of today, 37,000 views, which is fantastic, I must say. We did not expect that. So this is how we are trying to reach not just the academic world, but the broader world as well.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. You should definitely check it out. So since we've got folks who run clinics, I want to really have enough time to hit these issues. So Jim, tell us, I mean, your clinic is a religious liberty clinic. That's how it's described, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And so there are a lot of clinics on law school campuses, including yours. And so what is the defining mission or purpose of your clinic, and how is it distinguishable from other non-religious liberty clinics?
Sure. Thank you. And thank you to Mark and the Mattones. And it's a joy to be with you all. So our clinic was started, I guess, 13 years ago. It was an interesting combination. Is there a good word for perfect storm? I don't know what the word is, but it was a wonderful combination of an interest in law schools in developing their clinical programs as a core feature of legal education. So in a clinic, students learn by doing, just as you would in a medical residency, for example. You are, attending a patient. Our clients attend our students attend clients under our supervision, and it's a great way to learn the practice and profession of law through hands-on training. So law schools are increasingly emphasizing this. Now I think it's a requirement by the ABA. And at the same time, on our faculty, Professor Michael McConnell, in his work with the Beckett Fund, saw an interest in among students and the bar and the world, right, in religious liberty. I thought this is a wonderful opportunity to both meet the interest that law schools have in clinics, while at the same time that our culture obviously has in religious liberty, which is obviously a challenge that's been with us from the beginning of time, but is one that obviously has come to the fore. So the clinic was founded through this combination of pedagogy and principle, if you will. And what we've seen is obviously that combination bear great fruit through the work that our students do for clients of all faiths. We're committed to representing clients of all faiths, as Brett emphasized, which is both the right thing to do and also a wonderful way to attract a diverse group of students who, for a variety of reasons, come to our clinic attracted by the work that we do and our openness. So we are much like a traditional clinic where we are having students litigate, interview, counsel clients, write contracts, take depositions, write briefs, argue in court, all of the things that clinics do. But obviously we do it with an emphasis on religious liberty. So as a result, we have a twofold benefit. One, we think it's a great way for students to learn how to practice law, in terms of representing our clients in fraught situations of deep human meaning, often competing worldviews. There's nothing like, working for a client of a different worldview with a colleague of another worldview under the supervision of a faculty member with another worldview, right? To really cut your teeth as a lawyer, but also understand the issues at stake. And then obviously through our work with students and our scholarship and other public presence, we're able to witness to religious liberty as a universal value. And I've been overjoyed to see the idea take root at other great law schools around the country, and you're seeing that fruit today.
So I want to ask Jennifer and John, you're at religious institutions. Pepperdine is explicitly Christian. Notre Dame is Catholic. Does that inform the mission of a clinic? Does it make it different than what Jim has described for Stanford?
Well, I'll start to talk about our clinic. No, I don't think it changes the ultimate mission any differently than what Jim just described. I think sometimes I get the question of, oh, do you only represent Catholic clients? No, of course not. We represent people of all faith. We advocate for and even beyond our advocacy efforts, but nonetheless, the rights for all believers or non-believers. So I don't think in that way, sort of in maybe an instrumental way, the mission is different. But I think the reason for our clinic is different because the reason for our school is different, right? But for the Catholic Church, Notre Dame doesn't exist, I think. But for continuing to serve the Catholic mission of Notre Dame, there's no great reason for it to continue to exist. From a personal level, but for my own Catholic faith, I don't know that I would have ended up there personally, to be honest. But all of our faculty are not Catholic. Certainly not all of our students are Catholic. As I said, not all of our clients are Catholic. But I do take seriously presenting to our students of all faiths that the reason we do this is Notre Dame's Catholic faith, that we don't fight for these rights because the clients are Catholic, but we do fight for these rights because we are Catholic, because of what we as an institution believe about the nature of the human person, and that we're all entitled to equal dignity, and that it's written on the human heart, this yearning for truth, and this is a fundamental need and right for all of us. And that is why I think it's important for Notre Dame as a Catholic institution to have a clinic, just why it's also important for Notre Dame to have clinics that serve all sorts of other things that are in defense of important truths about the human freedom and the human person. So in that way, I think perhaps the underlying purpose in some way is different, but the ultimate mission of what we're doing and how we're trying to teach and train and form our students, I don't think is different. And Jim and I have, I think, had these conversations a lot.
So Jennifer, you were at Stanford and now you're at Pepperdine. Are there differences or are there more similarities?
That's a hard question to answer. I mean, certainly I would say every school has its, sort of institutional imprint and commitments. And when I was at Stanford, I was working in the Immigrants' Rights Clinic. I am now on faculty at Pepperdine, and I co-direct the Notre Institute, which houses a number of different programs and reflects a range of priorities. But one of the things that we do is we do have a clinic that my co-director, Michael Helfand, has founded. His main part, and so I'm a little bit hesitant to get into too much detail about the clinic, but I can at least in broad strokes, describe some of it because, in some ways the answer is like yes and no. In some ways, I think the way the clinic operates is very similar to what my friends here have described, an emphasis on student learning and student experience, on hands-on supervision. Some of the key partners of the clinic are the Beckett Fund. The Pepperdine Clinic has also partnered with the law firm Jones Day, and in particular has enjoyed a collaboration with the former Solicitor General Noel Francisco. And again, it's really sort of all credit is due to my co-director, Michael, for the work that has been generated really just over the past 4 years. The clinic has also taken on a range of matters representing clients of varying faiths, but has also participated in some of the more high-profile cases that have gone before the Supreme Court, the DeGraff case. It has not been. It has been willing to embrace some of the higher profile work in this area. I'll say also, like, as someone who had taught at other non-religious law schools before coming to Pepperdine, I often find myself in this sort of like inner dialogue as someone who is a Christian, but who has been in different spaces, including in a number of spaces that I think would be coded as more secular and progressive. And one thing I'll say is that I guess as a Christian, I hold very firmly through experience to the belief that God works in all spaces, irrespective of sort of the institutional context. And I've seen that time and time again from experiences with clients in immigration detention centers and with people and advocates, in immigrant communities, again, whether religious or not. But there is something special that happens when space is intentionally created, right? I say that as someone who's had just transformative, deep conversation. We've had a lot of conversations about just like the intimacy of working with students and the transformation that occurs. And I've seen that in secular contexts where, I sort of see a God who is always at work, but also being at an explicitly religiously affiliated law school, being able to have the privilege of co-directing a center that has resources. I do feel in some ways that the conversations have gone deeper. They are more accessible, and that has really been just personally, tremendously beneficial, both to, be part of those conversations, to sort of be witness to work that's going on in high spaces, and also to think about how in a religiously affiliated law school context, there will inevitably be a diversity of students, and there are, because of the climate in which we live, students who sometimes walk into these spaces feeling alienated from Christianity and from organized religion, who feel a call towards justice, which shares such deep biblical roots, serving a God who loves justice and loves those who are poor and disempowered and marginalized from the halls of power. So some of what I do in my capacity is also try to draw out those connections between the social justice side of the faith that I participate in, as well as kind of where the law has gone and the capacity of law to serve as a solution as well as a barrier to broader social justice goals that are or challenges that are unfolding in the world around us.
So, Josh, I think that I want to throw this to you then, because when I was in law school, I remember doing a clinical. It wasn't a religious freedom clinic. It was a homelessness clinic. And a lot of people in there were folks who were, felt very strongly about it, more because of their social, economic, political views, and some because of their religious views. No question about it. They took the notion I have to make sure that, the homeless have a place to live because that's an imperative from my religion. A religious freedom clinic, I imagine, does carry with it, at least religious freedom is often associated with the right. And does that have an effect on who is coming to your clinic? And Jim, I might ask you the same question, but Josh, is it something that is pulling students from all different faiths and all different perspectives?
I think in part, yes. I think it's some of both. So we do have students that come because of their religious faith, their religious convictions. They believe from a religious point of view that religious freedom is important, and so protecting religion, even the religion of others, is very important, very meaningful to them, and so they come to the clinic with a lot of passion for it. We also have students that come to the clinic that from, I think as others have said, from a pretty broad diversity of ideological perspectives and religious perspectives. Some students come pretty much from every faith imaginable, but also students of no faith at all come to the clinic. And it really is a really unique experience to work on these teams of students where we are all coming from different faith perspectives and defending the faith of a client who may not share the same faith as any of us, and trying to communicate that to a judge who may come from yet another perspective. And the opportunities for conversation and building bridges really, I think, are unparalleled.
So, Mike, I want to throw it over to you. We live in a polarized age. That's what everyone says. Are centers for law and religion, including those with clinical programs, helping to bridge that gap? Is it enhancing the quality of conversation on a campus, or is this a losing battle?
Well, I hope they are. Certainly at Villanova, which is a Catholic and Augustinian university, also a member of the Big East with St. John's. We have in our law school and in the university, we have a lot of the same polarization that you see in other political contexts. And certainly I take as part of the mission of my center is to foster civil discourse. As I was talking about this morning, I mean, our mission is kind of freedom of religion, freedom of speech, constitutional liberty, more generally, and that those are vexed and hard questions, but I think it's important that you model that civil discourse for students on these difficult issues, and religion is one of those, kind of third rail issues that a lot of people shy away from engaging, and show that that there are ways of engaging in very robust, very heated debate, but in ways that are constructive and respectful across those divides. And I think it's no mistake that just as a lot of law and religion centers are now, kind of emerging and popping up, there's also a movement in a lot of universities, a big and new initiative at Chapel Hill, for example, to have these centers about kind of somewhat kind of civics or civil discourse, or ways of kind of overcoming maybe some of the ideological polarization that higher education sometimes suffers from.
So I think law school has always had sort of those who viewed it as training for advocates, and others viewed it as sort of training for activists. And I think that number sort of changes over time. Sometimes the concentration is heavier for one or the other. The folks attracted to the centers, and particularly the clinical programs, are they more one than the other? Are they looking to be advocates first, or is this really an activist model? Jim, I'll start with you.
Sure, I would say on the whole, advocates. Certainly, there are some that may be attracted to the program for activism. To speak to you, and I think to bridge that to the previous question, I view part of our role and part of my own view on it that religious liberty should be a solution to division, not a cause of it. And I think we've seen that by attracting a diverse group of students from very different perspectives who may face certain pressure points in their lives in terms of why religious liberty resonates. So whether they are a member of a minority faith that's facing current challenges, whether they or their family have faced historic persecution, or whether their worldview is facing challenges in the contemporary context. So I think regardless of where they fit in, or students that are just interested in the ideas and the meeting clients and representing them in fraught situations and advancing justice and mercy for their clients. So they come to us for a variety of reasons. And I think once they work together and meet one another and have conversations on deep questions of deep personal significance to them, to their clients, and otherwise, there's something about that brings the temperature down and enables conversation across difference. So we've really seen that benefit. Let me share a real quick story on politicization. When we first started, I think one of our first days, a New York Times reporter was sent out to cover our launch, and I think his brief was to cover the launch of a conservative clinic at a liberal law school. That was, I think, going to be the headline. Well, he met our students, and one of our students, when asked several questions along these lines, who'd you vote for, what are your politics, what's your religion, just stopped the reporter and said, you keep asking us all these questions about politics and our own religious beliefs. He said, I'm a Democrat, I voted for President Obama. I'm not I was raised Seventh-day Adventist. I no longer practice. Please don't print that because my grandmother will be upset. He said, but what you're asking about, you're talking about, religious liberty as this conservative idea. In 2013, if it was the 60s, you'd be asking religious liberty as this liberal idea. In other words, the principle is the same. The politics might change, but the principle is the same. It's the same in season and out of season. And ultimately what it's about is human beings, right? It's about the human person, as Mark Geromley's program puts it. And I think that resonates across these divisions for advocate, activist, whoever you are. and bears great fruit through our work.
So I want to, Jennifer and John, real quickly. So how do you get your clients, and who makes the call as to what clients we're taking and what clients we're going to pass on?
I mean, I think in the Pepperdine Clinic context, as I understand it, again, it arises out of the collaboration with the Beckett Fund, and I believe there are some other sources of clients as well. It's not exclusively through Beckett, but it has been a very close collaboration, as well as other contacts that my colleague Michael has to generate clients.
Yeah, so we talked about this in our meetings today, and what I said there. I mean, who makes the call? I suppose ultimately it's me, but in consultation with several others, but including our dean, who's very supportive of our clinic. But aside from who decides, I suppose when I'm thinking about projects and clients, I suppose it's really I step back and think, why are we here? What's the goal? And the goal is to educate and inform students. Is obviously, of course, to serve the good of religious freedom and to serve people in need. But why are we doing that particular thing at a law school as opposed to opening up a shop down the street to have an advocacy shop for religious freedom? And it's because we're doing it in an academic environment to train, to teach, to form. And so the projects have to work for that model. They have to, in a very simple way, the timing has to work out. The complexity has to be one that fits with our resources. But also, we don't want to over-index on giving all of our students the same type of question or the same type of experience, the same type of organization or individual or whatever it is. And also, part of my thinking, as I reflected on earlier today, relates to your question to Jim, which is I don't want to just churn out activists. I don't think that's the role of a law school. I don't think it's the role of the academy. And so we also have to have claims and projects that are ones we believe in, we have to be intellectually honest and serious about. We can't just go for maximalist, what's the most sort of aggressive view of a religious freedom right that we could have, and that would be expedient in the time, and maybe it'll mean some more clients will win. But is it true to sort of the undergirding legal principles? Is it intellectually serious and honest? And we have to, I take that really seriously because, again, we're not doing this just to get results. We're doing this to serve the academy, to serve our students, to serve the courts, to serve the good, the public.
Josh, are there times when there are tensions between the client and the students in terms of what their objectives are? Or do the students understand the client calls the shots?
We're pretty explicit in teaching the students that we are client first, and so you might have some public interest advocacy organizations out there that are going to be cause first, and the cause is going to come before the client. We really aim to be client centered, of course, kind of with an eye on the cause and making sure that religious freedom is shored up and preserved, and that we're litigating in a way, kind of like John said, that will be for the long-term good.
So one of the things that came up again and again to this morning or early afternoon was prudence. In other words, prudence with respect to the mission, the cases you take if you're a clinic, and the kinds of things one would focus on in scholarship and curricula. And so Mike and Mark, maybe I'll start with you there. Do you view that as part of the equation in a society, including at a Catholic law school that is quite diverse?
So I think of myself as a prudent person generally, and I try to make that part of my scholarship too. And what does prudence mean in a situation like this? My scholarship tends to be analytic and descriptive. It tries to identify what problems are. It tries to show how changes in culture, like the rise of the religiously disaffiliated people, will impact its way on law. And I do take positions in my scholarship, and if anybody wants to know what they are, they can read them, as Mark DiGirolamo often says. But I don't throw bombs, and I don't unnecessarily poke people with sticks. And I've been thinking about this a lot today in our sessions. We've talked a great deal about this. And I wonder whether, just to be confessional about it, it's just my temperament. I'm not someone who does that sort of thing. I don't feel that I am being restrained or held back in some way. But I will say that to write in the area of law and religion, it's I used to write in international commercial arbitration. That doesn't upset anybody. Nobody gets upset about that. I used to do private international law. Nobody ever asked me why I'm writing in private international law. When I say I do law and religion, it's often a little bit of a frisson goes through the air. And someone says, well, why are you doing that, right? So I understand. Nobody ever asked me why I wrote about contract law. Never. So I understand that I do have to be somewhat careful in the sense that I am engaging questions and subjects that are quite neuralgic, that people care deeply about, and that, I want to be careful in addressing. So that's how I would put it.
Mike.
About prudence, or him? Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think it's incumbent on scholars in a university setting, especially, to exercise those kind of virtues of intellectual rigor and restraint, and of kind of modeling, as I said earlier, for our students what it means, especially in a legal environment, to engage in legal argumentation, but do so in a really objective, hard-hitting, analytic way. I was thinking of a student last year who came to my office hours, and she said, my friends and I say, you're the only professor that I was teaching a Con Law 2 course, which is Equal Protection, First Amendment. He said, you're the only faculty member that we have who we don't know what you actually think about any of these issues. But she said, but if you go online, we can find out. And I took that as I think I took it as a compliment, or I should take it as a compliment, because I do think that it's, important. I think as we were saying earlier, there's a lot of polarization, there's a lot of activism in the world, including the legal academy. And I think that part of what law and religion centers and scholars in those areas can do is to exercise those virtues of prudence and dispassionate, analysis in these areas.
So, Mike, you had said this morning, and I thought it was interesting, you thought that cancel culture had in some ways given way to a more tolerant and more open willingness to have dialogue on law school campuses.
I think that's right. I mean, these things can change very quickly. I think that's true on the speech front. I think the challenge on the religion front for a lot of these centers will be that I do think that trends towards secularization and disaffiliation will continue. I don't think there's much sign that those will be reversing anytime soon. I do think that on the speech issues, which obviously implicate the kind of work that a lot of us do, especially on controversial issues in the area of law and religion, I do think that there has been partly, I think, because of some of the protesting that occurred last year. I mentioned, for instance, the issue with Judge Duncan at Stanford. I think that because of some of those incidents, I think there's maybe been, and the ABA even now has a guideline about free speech policies at the law schools. So I do think maybe there's been a little bit of a step back from some of that, and I feel that that maybe things have gotten a little out of control, and that we need to respect those values of free speech again. But these things, as I said, they can turn around again quickly.
So, John, different law schools have different requirements. Some have virtually none after the first semester. Others have much more, a set of required courses that will take people into their second year. Notre Dame has a jurisprudence requirement. You want to describe what that is and just explain, do you think that makes a difference in the students that make it to your clinic?
To take the second one first, not necessarily because you just need to take it before you graduate, and we have 2Ls and 3Ls, so many of our students won't have taken it yet. So whatever they learn in jurisprudence, they may not have even gotten that yet. I think generally the requirement of jurisprudence, it probably reflects something about the Notre Dame curriculum. And to be clear, we have several different professors who teach it in many different ways. But I do think many of the professors who teach it do bring in Catholic intellectual thought into it in some form or another. But I think that's true outside of jurisprudence as well. Like, many of our 1L professors for contracts or criminal law especially will bring in Catholic intellectual thought in their own ways and when appropriate there too. And so I think jurisprudence in particular, I think is probably a subject where there's more sort of opportunity for that. And I think it's an important part of the student formation at Notre Dame, but I don't think it's limited to jurisprudence. And I don't think that particular class I can't see it necessarily in our own students, but I think the orientation of students at Notre Dame, if you were to generalize to some of these thinking like the good of religion or being open perhaps to the good of religion, I do think our students are probably different than those at many other schools. The average student at Notre Dame probably chose Notre Dame for some of these reasons, right? Like you get your LSAT score and you can kind of go where you want to go. And many of our highest achieving students chose Notre Dame because of its mission. And we see that in the clinic. And I think we see that, of course, in other classes too. But.
So I'll throw this to anybody, but Professor Okediji talked about how there's a lack of sort of baseline knowledge of Christianity, the Bible, I mean, things that would be taken for granted in the past, natural law. Do you think that law schools should be sort of filling that gap more systematically with either required courses or incorporating some of this into the early sort of first-year courses? Anybody?
I don't know about. I mean, I much admire all that Professor Okediji is doing at Harvard. I think that it would maybe. I don't know if it'd be like an institutional mission to impart biblical knowledge. I think it's very much important that there be people at the institution who can do that. Broadening it out a little bit, I do think, and this picks up some of the things that both Professor Okediji and others have been saying, I do think that law schools for a long time have shied away from any language about student formation and kind of moral formation. It's kind of, well, K through 12 education does that, and college kind of does it, depending on where you go. But by the time they get to law school, they're kind of fully baked, and we don't need to do any kind of work with regard to formation and kind of their moral and spiritual life. And I think that's a mistake, because I do think that, you know, a lot of our students are coming straight from college. They're in their early 20s, or even if they're not, even if then they're later in their career. I do think that work of formation, including spiritual and moral formation, especially at religiously affiliated universities, is very much important to the mission and important to the mission of these types of centers at these schools.
Yeah, we don't presume they can write anymore in law school. I mean, I don't mean that in a negative way, but I mean, the presumption is, it used to be maybe you came out of college and you knew how to write, but I think now law schools have recognized they need to do much more systematic training for writing, legal writing in particular, but part is because people haven't gotten good regular writing training. Well, I want to do that. I want to give at least an opportunity for one or two questions from the folks out here. So does anybody have any questions for this panel? We have just a couple of minutes. And it could be one of our scholars who was on the first panel, too. No. All right. Well, Mark, I'm going to give you the last word then, since this is your show.
Well, it's not my show, but thank you. So I want to say thank you to all the participants. It was, this is the first time this has ever been done, as I said, and I think it really was a spectacular success. We exchanged a lot of views. We have plans for, I hope, going back to our own centers and maybe doing some things a little bit differently. I know I do, based on what I heard today. I felt very, I guess we'd say, convicted by many of the things that were said. So I'm very happy about that. I want to thank everyone. I want to thank especially Rich Sullivan, who is always so good about giving us his time. I mean, he takes it very seriously, as you can see. And I'm very grateful that, Rich, you always do. I want to thank again the Mattones for making all this possible, and our other board members and supporters here. And now I'd say let's go have dinner, and we can continue the conversation there. So thank you very much.
It's Miller time.
It's Miller time, yeah.